Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah daf Tetzayin. Today's daf is sponsored by Kobe and Miri Darky in honor of the birth of their new grandson, son of Reshit and Shlomo Brightly, brother to Chirut Shira, who enters the breed of Abraham Avinu today. May he marry to grow in joy and health for Torah, marriage, and good deeds, and for the glory of the people of Israel, and is a Jewish source of pride for his parents and family. Today's daf is sponsored by Viti Rosenzweig in memory of her mother, Sarah Rosenzweig, a Holocaust survivor and daughter of Viti and David Greenbaum, who perished in the Holocaust. May her memory be a blessing. We miss her. Today's daf is sponsored by Shira Dishon for Staff Surgeon Eitan Dishon, Hashem Yikom Damo. His 23rd birthday is on the 8th of Tamuz. At the end of chapter 23 in Tehillim, it is written, "And I shall dwell in the house of Hashem for the length of days." This was his dream. Since Eitan fell, I have merited through him to join Hadran and to learn the daf each day and to feel a bit of this dwelling in the house of Hashem. May his memory be a blessing. Okay, we're going to get started with the Braita that we ended with at the end of yesterday's daf. We had a debate about whether we can sell shields to Gentiles or not. We had the fascinating sugya about selling weapons. There was a funny discussion on a WhatsApp group I'm in of a bunch of Daf Yomi teachers yesterday where someone said, "Why? We see the daf, but we don't do this. How is that?" And someone said, "Well, it's not like anybody asked the rabbis what they thought about it." So anyway, we now say, can we sell them shields or not, protective weapons? So one opinion said yes, one opinion said no. My time, well, what's the reason? And then we said, if it's because they're protecting them and therefore we can't sell them because anything is basically considered protecting the enemy, well, then we shouldn't even sell them wheat and barley, right? We end in this very interesting place where they said, well, then we can't even give them food, to which the Gemara Rav said, Yefshar hachinami. In other words, if we were to go this way, we wouldn't survive because the Gentiles would hate us, because if we don't give them basic food needs, we won't sell them basic things, right? It's an interesting thought to think that if we don't sell them basic food needs, they'll be angry and hate us, but we can yet say, well, we won't sell you weapons, and they'll be more understanding about it and won't hate us. I don't know, but I guess it was more, I don't know, for some reason that was the more basic need, and therefore that is impossible. That's a line we can't draw there, and therefore we're allowed to sell them that, even though theoretically we're helping them as well. Ika de Amre, some people actually explain it differently. Trisim hainutama delo dechishlim zainayu katle begavayu. You can't sell them shields because when their weapons are gone and they have no more weapons left, they'll start to resort to using their shields as weapons. So basically, even though they don't use them as weapons, they may come to use them as weapons, and that's why it's forbidden. V'yesh omrim, and some people say, mochrim lehem trisim, that we can sell them shields, dechishlim zainayu marak arke. Here we have a debate in terms of reality. Will they start using their shields when they have no more weapons, or will they just run away? Right? Because if you're going to fight with shields and that's all you have, you're likely not going to really fight, and you're just going to surrender or run away. Am Rav Nachman, Am Rav Ravua, halachaki yesh omrim. And Rav Nachman said in the name of Rav Ravua, we actually paskin that we can sell them shields because we assume they're just going to run away if they run out of their weapons. Am Rav Ada bar Ahava. Now, taking this line of the shields that could be used, let's say, theoretically for weapons, Am Rav Ada bar Ahava, ein mochrim lem ashishiyot shel barzel, my time, mishum dechalshing minayu klei zayin. So Rav Ada bar Ahava says, we do not provide them with chunks of iron because they can craft them into weapons and use them as weapons. So now we're learning even the raw materials we can't do. Well, then axes and hoes and things like that, we shouldn't be able to sell to them because also those they can use to create weapons with. In other words, one is the raw materials and the other is the tools that you need. So maybe we can't sell them those. Now, those obviously, as you know, this goes back to the whole discussion, when we sell them something, can we assume they're using it for the standard use or for some other use, right? Like with the slaughtering and with the working, right? Are you selling the animal, they're going to slaughter it likely, or are they likely to have the animal work? If they're likely to have the animal work, that's the problem because of Shvita Behema. Same kind of issue. So here they say, well then, any kind of tools that they can use to fashion weapons should be forbidden, which we know it's not. Amar Zvid, Parzala Hindua. So Parzala Hindua is a particular type of, some people think it's like from Hindu, from Indian. that they had whatever it was a special utensil that they used specifically to fashion the weapons. It was a much stronger piece of machine, weapon, much stronger, tool. And because of that, it was used specifically for weapons. So that we can't sell them. But the hose and the axes and the basic equipment, that we can obviously sell. Now then the Gemara points out, but nowadays we sell them this parzala hindua. So how can you explain that? Rav Ashi leparsai de magnu ilavan. This is I think the most interesting line of the whole sugya. He says to the Persians who are protecting us. Until now, right? Let's just talk about the confusion in our Masechet. There's all sorts of things that are related to idol worship specifically, right? Those are idol worshipers. Then there's things that are related to Gentiles in general, but maybe you can't really say in general because it's Gentiles that are out to kill us, right? That's also not all Gentiles, right? So what does he say here? That, well, if you have the Persians, right? Now the Persians, remember, modern day Iran, that's in Persia, so just interesting to note. Now, again, the Persians in different times were persecuting us and sometimes helping us. And what he's saying, Rav Ashi was living at the end of the Babylonian time period, at the end of the Amoraic time period in Babylonia. Apparently, obviously, in that time, there were good relations. You see, by the way, even in Shmuel's time, there was the Shavor Malka, the king, and there was the mother of the king, if you remember the Shavor Malka. She was giving tzedakah to people. So there were definitely times where the Persians had good relations. And then, it's not all Gentiles, obviously. It's the Gentiles that are trying to kill us. They're actually helping to protect us. So because they're helping to protect us, then obviously we can sell to them this equipment. So again, this shows how complex all these sugyot are, because it's not so clear who's included in all these prohibitions. Agalim usiachim. Now we go back to the Mishnah, which said not only the large animals can't sell to the Gentiles, because again, what's the concern? Maybe if we sell it, maybe you'll come to rent it or lend it, and then it'll be the Jew's animal working on Shabbat. Also, we had the test thing, but that's the very minor issue. So now they say even the young ones. Now the young ones don't work, so why would they be forbidden? Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda matir b'shvua, mipnei she'ena yichola litrapot v'lichyot. Okay, so by the way, before we even get into this, we'll just point out the young ones are forbidden to sell because they'll eventually grow older, right? And then people will see, oh, this animal that the Gentile has was bought from a Jew, and then they'll say, oh, we can also rent them, and we can do all sorts of things. So again, it's all this marit ayin, what it looks like and what people will misconstrue. So now the Braita says that Rabbi Yehuda permits the broken ones. Now this means not only, in the Mishnah, he permitted broken animals, also broken calves, okay? Calves that have something wrong with them. Because they're not going to be cured, and therefore they're not useful, right? They're not going to work, and they're not going to live, which means what? Again, this goes back to the question. For what is the Gentile purchasing them for? If they're purchasing them for work, it's a problem. By the way, this issue with the selling to Gentiles is any Gentile, because the whole problem is anyone who doesn't keep Shabbat, basically, is going to end up working the animal on Shabbat. And therefore, it's not connected to idol worship. It's not connected to Gentiles who want to kill us. It's across the board. That's why I said we keep using these phrases as if they're all one and the same, but each issue it's somewhat different. So now we say, well, if you're selling these small animals that are broken, well, obviously, as Rabbi Yehuda says, they're going to slaughter the animal, because what else do they have to do with this animal? No reason to keep the animal alive. So they'll slaughter. Again, this is all with the mind, which is obvious, which is people either buy them for slaughtering or buy them for working. So when it's clear they're buying them for slaughtering, we can obviously sell them. There's no problem. Now, Amrulo, the rabbis disagreed and said, what do you mean? Halomar bi'in aleha v'yoledet. If it's a female animal, they'll mate it with a male animal, and she'll give birth, and she'll be able to have other animals, and people will keep this animal, and then, kevan damar bi'in aleha v'yoledet, hatu l'shahuye. They will leave the animal. They won't necessarily slaughter it right away. They'll keep it to reproduce, because that's value, right? It has value for the future, for other. Amar lahen, so Rabbi Yehuda laughed at them and said, l'chisheteleid. I want to see a broken calf grow older and be useful for reproducing. Alma, from here you can infer, lo mekabelet zachar, that he believed that these broken animals, that no male will mate with a broken animal. interesting. Again, we have a bit of a debate about reality here. Are they able to mate? Are they not able to mate? And a machloket actually about reality. Because if they're able to mate, then obviously we're going to be concerned they're going to be left. And then again, what's the problem if they're left? They'll be in the hands of the Gentile. People will hear, oh, that was bought, years later. They'll see it's still there. That was bought from the Jew. And then they'll think that we can sell, and then they'll think we can rent, and all that. Ben b'tera matir b'sus. Then we had the story of the horse, and he permits the horse. Tanya, here comes a braita with more elaboration. Ben b'tera matir b'sus mipnei shu oseh b'melacha she'ein chayavin alaiha chatat. What do they use the animal for? They use the horses for riding on. That's the main purpose of horses. So because of that, it's actually not forbidden by Torah law to ride on Shabbat. It's only forbidden to ride on a horse by rabbinic law. And therefore, since it's only rabbinic prohibition of shvita behema, of the animal working on Shabbat, so we're not going to make a gzeira and say, well, don't sell, maybe you'll rent, maybe the animal will be over on shvita behema. But Rebbe disagreed with Ben B'Tera. It was obvious Ben B'Tera was an individual's opinion here. Who disagrees? Rebbe, that's Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Mishum Shnei Dvarim, for two reasons. Echad Mishum Torat Klezayim, one because of weapons. Echad Mishum Torat Be'magasa, one because it's a large animal. Okay, this isn't yet clear. Bishlama, so the Gemara is going to say we don't really understand. We understand part of what he said, we don't understand the other part. Bishlama Torat Klezayim Ika, we understand weapons because the Katil B'Sichufe, they kill people by treading on them. Okay, so let's say somebody falls down, they'll step on them, or maybe even, right, they'll take their hooves and kick, and who knows. But you could theoretically use a horse for battle. Ela torat be'magasam, but what are you going to use a big animal for? For work. Basically, the assumption is horses were used for riding, which means you're not going to work your horses for any reason because you want to save them for riding. That was their main purpose. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, l'chasheyaskin matchino b'rechaim b'Shabbat. Rabbi Yochanan says, once it gets older and you can no longer ride on it, at that point, people will use it for their millstones, right? Because what would they do? It was a round, big stone, right? One sitting on top of the other. They would put the grains in the middle, and then an animal would walk around in circles. So an old horse is useful for that. So since people would eventually use their old horses for work, there you have a situation, and that's why Rebbe forbade. Rabbi Yochanan, but even though Rabbi Yochanan explained Rebbe's opinion, he also says halakha ke ben b'tera. We actually hold like ben b'tera, and we permit to sell horses. We're not worried about, when they get old, they'll be used for some work purpose. That's not really an issue. Now they ask a question. Shor shel patam mahu. Again, if we go back to this model, that the whole question is, are you selling the shor, the ox or the animal, for slaughtering, or are you selling it for working? So what if you have an animal that was being fattened up? Why do you fatten up animals? You fatten them up to sell them for slaughtering. You obviously don't fatten them up for work. The fatter they are, the harder it's going to be for them to work. So you have to schlep their bodies along with them. So if you're fattening up the animal, you're fattening it up so that it's got more meat on it when you slaughter it. So the question is, what's the question? We're going to see right now. Tibai Rabbi Yehuda, Tibai Rabbanan. We're going to ask this question both according to Rabbi Yehuda, who, if you remember, permits the broken one because obviously you're going to slaughter it, and Tibai Rabbanan, who doesn't permit the broken one. So let's read why. Tibai Rabbi Yehuda. We're going to ask the question according to Rabbi Yehuda, and each one, right, each way we ask the question is going to be a different question. According to Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to say Ad kan lo kashari Rabbi Yehuda ala b'shvura. When did Rabbi Yehuda permit? In a broken animal. Now, this animal isn't broken. This animal is fat. Now, a broken animal will never be able to work again because once it breaks its leg, there's no way to fix it, and it will never be able to work. And therefore, obviously, we're going to slaughter it. But this one, but do we say this animal? Theoretically, you could stop giving it a lot of food, right? Had you fattened it up, you gave it a lot of food. You could stop giving it a lot of food. It'll thin out, and then you can actually work the animal. So that should work. And then, if that's the case, then you shouldn't be allowed to sell it, because theoretically, there's a good chance that the owner who buys this fattened up animal might actually want it to work, and we'll just leave it for a few weeks, not give it a lot of food. The animal will slim down, and they'll use it for working. Later, we'll ask, can you really do that? in the world, does that work? Okay, in a reality world. We'll have a reality check on that. O Dilma, or this is the other question. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to say, Rabbi Yehuda, who generally permits the broken one, maybe doesn't permit it here. And the rabbis who do forbid the broken one, maybe will permit it here. So what's the logic? O Dilma, afilu l'Rabbanan lo ka'asrei hatam, ela distame lav l'shchitakai. Now, the rabbis don't forbid it there, the shvura, because, we're going to say, the stam animal there is not really meant for slaughtering. Aval hai, distame l'shchita. In other words, the broken animal, it's not like people break animals in order to slaughter them, okay? But here, distame l'shchitakai, afilu rabbanan sharu. What was your point of fattening up the animal if not to sell it for a lot of money so that someone could slaughter it? As it's pretty clear that this is going to be slaughtered. And what they're saying here, stame lav l'shchita, is a regular broken ox is really just an ox with a broken leg. And oxen, in general, are not really meant for slaughtering. They're meant for working. But here, this animal that's fattened up generally just ends up being slaughtered. That's why people fatten them. So maybe the rabbis will actually permit it because it's, where does it go on the scale of, are we going to slaughter this animal? Quite likely. So that's our question. Tashma, let's try to learn it from here. To Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Shal Beit Rebbe, Hayuma Krivim Shor Shal Pitam B'Yom Edam. It's going to take us some time to understand this whole thing and how we're going to prove it. In the house of Rebbe, they would bring, Makrivim is not sacrifice, it means they would bring, there was a tax they had to pay on the holiday of the Gentiles. They would have to pay this tax of a fattened up shor. So they would bring a shor shal patam b'yom edam on their holiday. Now the first year, Rebbe said, first year I'm going to offer them money, I'm going to try to bribe them. Chisar arba rivavan, so he offered them this large amount of money. She'ema krivino to hayom ela lemachar. He said, listen, we're not going to bring it to you on your holiday, we're going to bring it to you the next day. Chisar arba rivavan, the next year, he said, I'm going to offer you that same amount of money this year. She'ema krivino to chay ela shachut, that we're going to give it to you slaughtered and not alive. That's the line we're going to go back to at first. We're going to go back to all these lines, but we're going to go back to that line first. So remember it. Third year, Chisar arba rivavan she'ema krivino to kolikar. In the third year, he said, listen, we're going to pay you, and we're not going to bring this tax at all. We're just not going to bring you these animals. So, my taima. Now, why did he say we're going to bring you slaughtered and not alive? Lav mishum dilma ate the shehuye. Is it because we're worried? Is it not because we were worried that they'll keep the animal alive and not slaughter it? And if they keep the animal alive, what's the problem? People will see that we gave this animal, and they'll think that you can also rent your animals to Gentiles, loan your animals to Gentiles, and it will cause the Jews to sin. So the Gemara says, why are you assuming that's the issue? V'litamech, and if you assume that's the issue, according to you, she'emak, and then, right, so again, what would that prove? Fattened up shvarim, right? The concern is they might actually leave them, and therefore it's going to be forbidden in general to sell them. And that explained why Rebbe paid a lot of money to basically give it slaughtered so that there's no chance they're going to keep the animal alive. Otherwise, you'd have to worry they keep the animal alive. So the Gemara says, wait, but according to what you're saying, well then, why did he ask to push it off till the next day? What did that help? In other words, the first year said, we'll give it to you tomorrow. But if they gave it to him tomorrow alive, and then if they weren't going to slaughter it, they were going to leave it, then it would be the same problem. So that doesn't seem to be related at all. Ella, they come to explain what Rebbe was really trying to do. Now you have to remember, Rebbe, number one, was in connection a lot with the authorities. He was a Nasi, he was very prominent, he was wealthy, and what he did was he was also political. He knew how to get things done. What Rebbe was really trying to do, he had a long-term vision. Rebbe mi'aker miltabai. He wanted to get rid of this whole thing. V'savar ye'aker v'ate porta porta. He just didn't want them to pay the taxes. So because of that, every year he came with a small request. Okay, this year we just want to bring it the next day. The next year we want to bring it to you slaughtered already. Anyway, you really probably wanted slaughtered for your holiday, right? Someone asked why the holiday. It's because they wanted animals for their holiday. So they basically requested a lot of, animals. It was this tax. And by the way, why isn't it forbidden to give it to them? They're going to offer it to their idols, right? Or they'll thank their idols because they got the sale. This isn't a sale. It's different. It's just a tax that was obviously coming to them. So it wasn't seen as, oh, wow, we're so excited this happened, because it's just expected. That's one of the explanations given. Anyway, he basically wanted to get rid of this entirely. He just didn't want them to pay the tax. So his whole tactic was, let's go little by little. I'll bribe them a little this year for this. I'll bribe them a little next year for that. I'll bribe them the third year and get out of it completely. Okay, so that explains Rebbe, and this has nothing to do with our sugya then. But now we're asking the question that I said before. We're going to have a reality check. If you leave the animal and don't feed it food, bari va'avid malacha, it can, like, all of a sudden, this heavy fat animal can't really work, and then you're going to thin it down, and what, it can start working again? Amar Rav Ashi, Amar li Zvida. Okay, Rav Ashi probably learned in yeshiva most of the time and didn't really know about animals so much, so he says, Zvida told me, he was like the expert, they knew who to go to when they needed certain things, he knew all about this. Bar Torah mashinale va'avid al chad tchein. If you leave a fattened up ox and you thin it out, it actually does double the work, okay? It's so efficient, it works better than a regular animal, so yes, there is reason to believe that people would leave this animal over. That is true. Okay, new Mishnah. Now, you can't sell them things like bears and lions that are a hazard to society. In the same lines of hazards to society, there's other things that are hazards to society, and that's, you can't build a basilica, a gardom, itztiada, ubima. Okay, what are these things? Good question. There's a lot of different interpretations. A basilica, if you've ever seen basilicas, right, they're usually big buildings, fancy buildings, and they're often used for courthouses, and that's possibly what the issue is here. Could be like a king's palace. We're going to see later, the Gemara is going to say there's a bunch of different types of basilica, and but the main problem here seems to be they're used for judging people. And if you're, again, going back to, these are the people we're talking about, the Romans would often judge people to death and put people to death. So it's like having bears and lions that are hazards to society, having these courts where it's a mockery of a court and they're just putting people to death is dangerous. Okay, we'll talk in a minute about what exactly the problem is here. Okay, gardom, that's also there. Gardom actually means steps, but it's usually the steps that led up to the court or led up to where the judge was sitting or something else having to do with judgment. Which is why some people think the basilica is really just a palace and not necessarily a courthouse, because the gardom is the courthouse. So, like I said, different interpretations. Itztiada are stadiums. Right? Remember, they had gladiators. They would kill people, right? Have people kill each other. Or bullfights, things like that. Bima. Okay, the bima, good question. It sounds like a big podium. Some people say that they used to throw people off from them. Okay, it was this big tall building and they would throw people off to death there. So those you can't. Aval bonim imahem bimusyaot, which are either possibly smaller platforms, which are not used for anything like throwing people off to kill them, or some people say it's dimusiot, which are just public buildings and not public buildings that are courthouses, but just regular public buildings. I was thinking like a post office, which obviously didn't exist then, but something like that, which is, a neutral kind of place. Ubeit marchatzaot, the bathhouses, which also were neutral places. However, but there was an area in the bathhouse where they would put up a statue for Aphrodite, and that people worship. That area you can't help with because that's eating Avodah Zarah. So now the question is, what's the problem with this Mishnah? And the Rishonim, as usual, go off on different possibilities. Either it's because they'll cause damage to Jews, right? These are dangerous places where they frame Jews for all sorts of things. We'll end with the story of that today. And tomorrow we'll get to Asarah Harugei Malchut, some of them. The ones that were killed by the Jews, the rabbis. Some people, or possibly not to Jews, but to anybody. These are hazards to society at length. We have to worry about everybody, really, in society. Some people say it's lifnei iver. It's putting a stumbling block. You're enabling them to murder people. And some people say that they use these places as places of idol worship. And that, again, you're aiding idol worship. Okay? Or lifnei iver for idol worship. So there's all different interpretations. Now we're going to have a sugya that kind of is going to appear in a bunch of different ways. And in a minute, you'll see how this connects with our Mishnah. maybe I'll even tell you right away how it connects with our Mishnah before we even start it. Just the Mishnah says you can't sell dubim and arayot. Now, dubim and arayot we didn't talk about yet, but you talked about be'ema daka and be'ema gasa. And we talked about be'ema daka, right, the small animals. It depends on where you live, whether or not you can sell them and not. The concern was bestiality. We talked about the large animals, the shvarim and all those, the oxen and the cows, because they use them for work purposes. And therefore they could never sell them because of the whole concern of shvita behema. Two different issues and different. Now those are domesticated animals, behemot. But now what about chayot? Chayot are undomesticated animals, for example, like lions and bears. Question is going to come up, and there's going to be a machloket, can you sell them or can you not sell them? Are they like behemot hakot, that it depends on the minhag? Now the minhag wouldn't be about bestiality, the issue would be, do you work these animals or not? Right? Chayot weren't always really worked. Domesticated animals were what people use, and they use them for working. What about undomesticated animals? Did they use them for work or not? Okay, we'll see later, like there's a wild donkey that people sometimes use for work. So on the other hand, lions, people don't really use for work. Okay, we're going to talk about these things. So from our Mishnah, if you take lions and bears and you basically say, okay, lions and bears, what category would you put them in? Undomesticated, large or small? Large, right? So large undomesticated animals are what's mentioned in the Mishnah. Now, what does it say about them? You can't sell them. Why? Because they're a hazard to society. Which means if they're not a hazard to society, like other types, deer, things like that are not a hazard to society, you should be able to sell. So that would make it sound like the large undomesticated animals are actually permitted. Okay. So on our book, let's forget about this for a quick minute, and let's go into the sugya. The sugya has a debate about these chayot gasot. Amar Rav Chanim bar Rav Chisda, Amar la Amar Rav Chanan bar Rava. Okay, it's one Rav Chanim bar Chisda, Rav Chisda the son of Rav Chisda, or Rav Chanan the son of Rava. You can see why they got confused between them. Rav Chanim, Rav Chanan, both sons of great rabbis. Amar Rav said, either one of them said in the name of Rav, Chayat gasa harei ki be'ema daka lepirkus. This is a totally different issue. It's like a be'ema daka for the purposes of pirkus. I'll tell you in a minute what that is. Aval lo lemechira. Okay, the main point being for our sugya, not for selling. For selling, it's not like the be'ema daka, meaning it's not based on minhag hamakom. It's forbidden. It's like a be'ema gasa, like the big animals of the be'emot. You can't sell them. What's this pirkus? So pirkus is an issue of slaughtering. When you slaughter an animal, the animal has to flail a little bit. If it doesn't flail, it means you must have killed it before you finish slaughtering it. And that's a problem, because you have to do kosher shchita. And if it doesn't have any spasm, it shows that you must have killed the animal before. And then it's not a kosher shchita. The shchita has to be that you slaughtered the animal while it was still alive. Now, the type of spasm you need differs in the be'ema gasa and the be'ema daka. Okay, it has to be a double spasm, like the front leg has to spasm forward and backwards, or backwards and forwards, in a be'ema daka, in a small animal. In a large animal, it's enough to just spasm in one direction. So, the question is, what's the rule for a chayat gasa? And they say it's like a be'ema gasa. Only one, in both directions, it needs to spasm for the animal to be a kosher shchita. Now, they're going to talk about the mechira. Va'ani omeo, after Rav Chanan quoted Rav, he says, but I disagree with Rav. I hold af lemechira. It's even like the be'ema daka for selling, which means it's based on minhag hamakom. Now, makom shnagu linkor ochlim shelo linkor ein mochrim. Now, it's not because of bestiality. It's because if they work the animals, then it's forbidden. If they don't work the animals, it's not forbidden. Very simple. Tanan, what's the problem? It disagrees with our Mishnah. What does our Mishnah say? Now we go back to what I told you before. Can't sell these animals because they cause hazard to society. It sounds like if they're not causing a hazard to society, like other deer or things like that, well, it should be permitted. So that's a problem. We're going to have two answers to this. I'm a Rabbi Barbarula. Be'ari shavul. We can say our Mishnah that infers that you could permit it would be a lion that's broken, okay? And then the lion that's broken can't do work anyway, and that's why you wouldn't be able. That's why you would be able to sell it. I'll leave it to Rabbi Yehuda, and obviously that would only fit Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. So we have to say our Mishnah is only Rabbi Yehuda, and it's only if the lion was broken. Rav Ashi Amar Stam Ari Shavurhu Eitz Malacha. Do you ever see an animal, a lion working? No, lions don't work. Doesn't mean other chayot gasot don't work. So basically, Rav Ashi kind of answers similarly, but says any lion is considered broken as relates to malacha, even if they're not broken. And then all you have to say is the Mishnah's Rabbi Yehuda's position, which is if it's not relevant for work, then it's permitted to sell. Okay. So now we're going to bring a difficulty. So this was basically, they brought our Mishnah to prove Rav Chanin. Okay, they tried to prove Rav Chanin really and raise a difficulty with Rav and say, look, Beimot chayot gasot can be sold. And that's what Rav Chanin said. But then they rejected the proof and said, well, there's two other ways to explain this, and it could all be Rabbi Yehuda, and it could either be it's broken, or it could be it's broken because it never does work, and therefore it's not a proof. Now we're going to raise a difficulty from a Braita. Okay, that seems pretty straight and clear. Just like we can't sell them large domesticated animals, we also can't sell them large undomesticated animals. Very clear. This says it. And in case it wasn't clear enough, even in a place where they sell them small animals, you can't sell large undomesticated animals. And that's tiyufta de Rav Chanan bar Rava tiyufta. That's clearly, this Braita contradicts Rav Chanan's opinion, or Rav Chanin's opinion, whoever it was. That's the way we read the sugya number one. So the first thing we did was we brought the machloket. First Rav Chanin quoted Rav and then said, I disagree. We brought the Mishnah to prove Rav Chanin, rejected the proof for two possible reasons, and then brought a Braita to contradict Rav Chanin, and that was successful. Now we're going to have sugya number two. Same content, but in a different way. It's just kind of reshuffling it. Ravina, Rami Matnitin Abraita Umeshane. Ravina, ended up with the same conclusions kind of thing, but did it in a different way. He started with the Mishnah and the Braita. He didn't start with Rav Chanin and Rav's debate. He started with the Mishnah and the Braita. And he said, look, the Mishnah and the Braita contradict each other. Tanan, the Mishnah says, you can't sell them these chayot gasot. They cause damage to the public. That's because, now it's going to all be reviewed. It's just coming at it from a different angle. That's because they cause damage. But if they don't cause damage, if they don't cause damage, you can sell them. Urimini, but that contradicts the following source. You can't sell them at all. And even in a place where the custom is to sell the small animals, you can't sell them the large animals, the large undomesticated animals. Now, after he raises this contradiction, the Mishnah seems like, in general, you can sell them as long as they don't cause a hazard. The Braita says you can never sell them. How do we resolve it? And now we're going to go back to the two answers we had before. The two rejections of the Mishnah being a proof for Rav Chanan. We're now going to say, in order to resolve the Braita, which disagree with Rav Chanan, with the Mishnah, we're going to explain the Mishnah in those two ways. And we're basically going to say the lion and the bear, obviously, but they don't mention it, it's just obvious. The lion and the bear either are broken, and it's Rabbi Yehuda, or all lions and bears don't do work ever for humans, and therefore they're considered like a broken animal, according to Rabbi Yehuda, and the Mishnah matches Rabbi Yehuda. And that's why there's no contradiction. Third way of understanding this. Before we get there, Matkefla Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman now questions Ravina and his assumption from the beginning that there's even a contradiction. He says, what are you talking about? There's no contradiction. Yes, a great question. Man lemalan da'ari chayagasahi. When I read the Mishnah, I told you, right? Bears and lions are clearly large, undomesticated animals. He says, who says a lion is a large, undomesticated animal? Dilma chayatakahi. Maybe a lion is an undomesticated animal, but a small one. And if you think about it, if you look at, now, I don't know how he deals with the bears, but if you look at the oxen and you look at the sheep, right? That's the different categories. The lion's kind of in between. So he says, it's not even a chayagasa. So there's no contradiction between the Braita that talked about chayot gasot and the Mishnah that talked about lions. They're not the same thing. And then there's no contradiction at all. And then we're going to have the third way of reading the sugya. Rav Ashi diek matnitin umotiv tiyufta. Rav Ashi made an inference from the Mishnah and then brought a difficulty from the Braita. So let's read. Tanan emochrim lem dubim varayot below kol davar sheish bo nezik l'rabim. Again, it's all going to be the same content, just like I said, kind of mixed up around and read differently, from a different starting point. He started with the Mishnah. And he said, the Mishnah says you can't sell dubim barayot and not anything that's a hazard for society. Tama di nezek. This is because they cause damage. Ha lepe nezek muchrim. Okay, we should know this by now. If they don't cause damage, you can sell them. Vitama ali. Now he already started by saying, this is very clear that it's just the lion. Remember, this is what Rav Ashi said in the first place. Distam ali shavurhu etzam malacha. Because all lions are considered broken. Avamidi achrini da ave malacha lo. But any other type that could work, obviously you can't sell them. And then he brought this as a contradiction to Rav Chanan. Tiyufta de Rav Chanan bar Rava tiyufta. Okay, and then he said, and now the inference from our Mishnah, which is it must be only lions, but other chayot, so for sure you can't sell because people use them for work, and then that contradicts what Rav Chanan said, that it depends on makom shenag. Now we're going to end with one last thing of this sugya before we move on to the next one. Now, what kind of work can you do with an undomesticated animal? Amar Abaye, Amar li Mar Yehuda. So again, Abaye doesn't really know himself. He sat in yeshiva all day. But he said, Mar Yehuda told me that Bei Mar Yochani Tachani Rechaim Ba'alude. That let's hear it from someone who saw somebody else, that he would take, I told you we get to this wild donkey, on a road is a donkey, a wild donkey, and would have it do the millstone. So there you see, the chayot do work. Okay, even though they're not doing the plowing and the hard work, but they are doing work. So that was 3 different versions of the sugya, which all kind of came around in a similar way. I'm a Rabbi Zarah. Ki avina be Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, now we're going to have a whole sugya about the pirkus. We're not going to get into details about the pirkus. It's not a halachic sugya at all. It's all about somebody said something. Who was he quoting? And then when that person who was quoting that person, all about who said what. So we can go through this fairly quickly. I'm a Rabbi Zarah. Ki avina be Rabbi Yehuda Amarlam. When I was at Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Zarah says, now you have to remember Rabbi Zarah. He was a Babylonian who went to Eretz Israel. So you're going to see his whole journey through this. Rabbi Zarah says, when I was in Rabbi Yehuda's yeshiva, Amarli, Gemiru minai hai milta. In other words, he told us that he learned the following thing. To Migav Rabbi Shmiele, that I heard it from a great person. This is the problem. Rabbi Yehuda said, I heard it from a great person, but didn't say from who. And you know that he learned from both Rav and Shmuel. Right? He learned with Rav first, and then when Rav died, he learned with Shmuel. V'lo yadani imi Ravi mishmuel, but I don't know who he was quoting, which one. And what he taught us was, and that was the halacha he taught, the one we saw before. We saw this, by the way, in the name of Rav, in the beginning of the sugya. In fact, Rav Chanin said it in the name of Rav, right? Or maybe Rav Hanan. Okay, it's like a be'magasa for pirkus. When I got to this other place, and then I heard him quoting Shmuel, in the name of Shmuel, exactly this halacha. Okay? Amina, I said, Shema mina mishmei Shmuel itmar. So I said, it must be he learned it from Shmuel. However, ki'ata l'sura, that's where we're getting his whole trek. When I got to Surah, eshkachte l'Rabbi bar Yirmiyah diyate v'ka'amar lemishmei de Rav. I heard Rabbi bar Yirmiyah, remember his name, Rabbi bar Yirmiyah, say it in the name of Rav. Chayagasarei kibemada kalapirkus. Amina shma mina itmar mishmei de Rav ve'itmar mishmei de Shmuel. So then I realized Rabbi Yehuda must have said it. When he said Gavar Rabba, maybe he meant both. Kislikat lahatam. Now, when I got there, what's there? Israel. When I got to Israel, echshachte l'Rav Asi diyate v'ka'amar. I saw Rav Asi, who was teaching. Amar Rav Chamer bar Guria mishmei de Rav chayagasarei kibemada kalapirkus. So he quoted not Rabbi bar Yirmiyah in the name of Rav, but he quoted Rav Chamer bar Guria in the name of Rav. Amrei levelo savar lamar deman mara dishmata Rabbi bar Yirmiyah. He said, but you don't have it that Rabbi bar Yirmiyah is the one who said in the name of Rav? Amarli patya uchama, you black pot. Okay, blackened pot was a nice word for a Torah scholar, because they would sit in the yeshiva all day and blacken themselves with Torah. We've seen this before. So he was saying a nice thing, and he said, Minayu minach testayim shmata. If you combine what you have and what I have, we're going to figure it all out, which is the Rabbi bar Yirmiyah must have learned it from Rav Chamer bar Guria, who learned it from Rav. And in fact, Itmar Nami, it was said, Amar Rabbi Zarah, Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rabbi bar Yirmiyah, Amar Rav Chamer bar Guria, Amar Rav, Chayagasar Reiki Be'mada Kalapirkus. Here we have all of them. Rabbi Zarah said in the name of Rav Asi, who said in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, who said in the name of Rav Chamer bar Guria, who said in the name of Rav. Okay, that was all, shows the importance of how important it was for them to get to tradition. And I like the way when Rav Asi and Rabbi Zarah say different things, Rav Asi says, we don't contradict, let's just combine them. It must have been he learned it from him, we learned it from him. Okay. Ein bonim. Now we get back to this basilica. Amar Rabbi Baruch Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan shalosh basilikotim. I told you we get to. There's different types of basilicas. Shel melachim, shel merchatzaot, v'shalot tzarot. Okay, there's ones that belong to the kings. There's ones that were done for the bathhouses, these fancy buildings for bathhouses, and ones for the treasures of the king. Amar Rava, shnayim leheter ve'echad lisu. 2 are permitted and 1 is not. Which one is not permitted? The kings, because what did the kings do in their basilica? That's where they had their courts and would execute people. This siman, and how do you remember this? Le'esor malchehem bezikim. This means to tie their hands in handcuffs. But what the way to remember, le'esor malachim, to forbid, right? Le'esor he means to bind, but here it means to forbid the kings, the basilica of the kings. That's how you remember it. It's a mnemonic. Okay, that's version 1 of the sugya. That Rava said, of these 3 that they mentioned, only 1 is forbidden. But Ikeda Amre Amar Rava, some people said that Rava said, Kulan leheter, they're actually all permitted. Because the kings was really just a palace for the king. They didn't execute people there. And then that would explain that the Gardom is really, like I said before, that's where they would judge people. And they say, what do you mean? It says you can't build a basilica. So how can you build the basilica and yet Rava says you can't? You can when the Mishnah says you can't. Ema shel gardom v'shel itztadia v'shel bima. Okay, just get rid of basilica from the list. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we get to a famous story of Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus. He's the one in the Tanu Rosh Halachnai story, very famous rabbi, very prominent, and we're going to hear a story about him and the Romans. From there, we're going to get tomorrow to the story of 2 other rabbis, prominent rabbis, who were actually executed by the Romans. This is going to be an almost execution, but Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus gets out of it. Kishenitfas Rabbi Eliezer leminut helu legardom lidon. Now, the reason why they're mentioning this is because the Gardom, and the Gardom is basically the place where they would judge people to execute them. And here you see Rabbi Eliezer was captured as a heretic. Okay, crazy story. How he could be captured as a heretic. First of all, you're going to see why he was so upset, because they claimed he was a heretic. Right? Some people say they claimed he was an early Christian. These are the pagans that were against the early Christians, and that was what they were claiming, which was horrifying to Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus to be executed as a Christian, as a heretic. It's a little bit strange. Amar lo to'agmon. Right? An elder like you, what are you doing involved in this heretical stuff? Amar lo ne'eman alai hadayan. He said, the judge is trusted to me. Now, what did he mean? God, like God save me, okay? But kasavor to'egmon alav hu omer. He thought he was talking about him. V'hu lo omer ela keneged aviv shebashamayim. But he was really talking about God, not about the Roman officer. Amar lo ho'il ve'emanta alecha dimus paturata. Okay, now, because you trusted in me, and some people say the dimus is his God, in other words, you believed in my God, you're exempt. Okay, and I'll let you go. So he gets out. Basically, he gets saved, miraculously. But he was very depressed. And when he got home, his students came to make him feel, to console him. But he refused to be consoled. Amar Rabbi Akiva, Rebbe, Tarsheni Lamar Davar Chad Mimashu Limaditani. Let me tell you something from what you taught me. We'll talk about that tomorrow, what that means exactly. Amar Lo, and Mori says, say, Amar Lo, Rebbe, Shema Minu Aliyatcha V'Hanacha V'Alav Nitpasta. Is it possible that somehow you once benefited from something of a heretic, and maybe because of that you got captured and they claimed you were a heretic? In other words, it was God's way of punishing you for some sort of benefit you got from heresy, and that's why they claimed you were a heretic? I don't think he means that's why the Romans claimed you were a heretic, but that's why God punished you in this way, that you almost, that you had to go through this traumatic experience. I'm going to continue with the story tomorrow, and as I said, we'll get to some of the Harugei Malchut, where the Romans actually did execute them, and we'll continue from there. So what we did today, we started with the shields, protective or equipment that's used to build weapons. Can you sell them that? And depending on, again, the question with all these sugyot, is it mainly used for weapons, or is it only sometimes, and likely they're not buying it for that, and therefore you can? Okay, then we had the same kind of idea with the animals, to sell the animals. Again, is it for slaughtering purposes? Is it more likely they're buying it for work? And that we talked about with the calves, the calf that was broken. We talked about with the horses. That was really, again, the issue is why you're getting the horse, for riding on, or is it for war or something like that, or for working, different possibilities there. We had the one you fattened up, again, also there. Which one is it more likely they're buying it for? And then we got to the Mishnah about the Dubim and Arayot and the Basilica and all that. We started with this 3 ways of understanding the Sugya about the Chayot Gasot, how that works in with the Mishnah, how it works in with the Other Braita. And then we had the last part about the Basilica and the different kinds of Basilica. Is it in the Mishnah? Is it not in the Mishnah? Is it forbidden? Is it not? Depends on really how you define what a Basilica is. And again, one of those cases where the Tanaim and Amoraim were living in different places with different reality, and therefore maybe that's why they added the Mishnah. Basilica maybe in later times came to mean something else, that in earlier times it wasn't. Anyway, that's also something to think about. And with that, we end with the story of Rabbi Lezer ben Horkanus. With that, we finish for today. Just a minor point, I'll be starting on Sunday specifically at 6:55 on the Zoom for those who, so 20 minutes earlier. For those who come on Zoom, just as a one-off, I have to start early. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.